So I'm Benjamin England. I'm a research associate with the Postsecondary Data Partnership, and I'm going to be talking today again about how you can submit those new optional data elements, as well as just some of the small updates we've done to the current files. And thank you again also for your feedback and suggestions. Many of the changes, additions that I'm going to talk about today are actually based on feedback that we've received from our users. So we definitely appreciate that feedback and suggestions coming to us. That's really important for us to act upon. So I do want to, sorry, my forward, there we go. Just want to give you an overview on some of the objectives for today. If you did join late, you probably didn't see this slide that we had up, but I would appreciate if you actually go to our knowledge base and look for the current data submission guide. I'm going to call out some of the pages that are relevant today in the actual current data submission guide. I do want to acknowledge that we do try to keep the data submission guide as up to date as possible based on user feedback. If there's ever a question or something confusing, we try to edit that. So I would say, please do make sure that you periodically check this data submission guide to make sure that you're staying with the most current one. The other thing that I would note based on that is because we do update this, sometimes the pages might shift just a little bit based on what I'm going to actually present today. So again, the pages as of right now are correct and correspond to the page in the current data submission guide, but in the future, it may be a page off. Just wanted to acknowledge that. I do want to talk about, again, what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about just some of the updates that we've done with the existing files, what we've added in regards to these new optional fields, and how to change your existing files to accommodate that. And then I also have come up with some hopefully useful special cases and examples that may apply to some of the data submitters that are here today. So I'll talk about that when we get through some of the basic information that we're going to get through at the beginning two parts. And hopefully by the end of the webinar, you'll better understand what we've actually done and how to actually do this within your files, how to actually correctly upload this data, including some special cases that might apply to you. So hopefully that kind of gives you an understanding of where we're going to go through today. And where I'm going to start is just the updates that we've done to what we refer to as kind of the current cohort and course files. So I'm going to start here. It's a little bit simpler, a little bit smaller. So wanted to start there to warm everyone's brain up to data submission. So one of the first things is we have done some small updates to the current cohort and course files. So we've done two updates to the current cohort file and one update to the current course file. Nothing has changed in the optional financial aid file. These really are not related to anything structural about the file. It's truly actually just to the values or variable types for three fields. Again, two in the cohort file and one in the course file. So this is just saying that we're accepting different values or a different variable type for that. So let me go over each of those in turn and unpack that for you. So the first one is the race value that exists currently in the cohort file has actually been updated to include a new value, which is TM. So TM is basically the idea that if the data submitter or institution does not know the individual races of the student, they can actually upload this as the value for their race. Previously, we accepted the pipe separated values, like you see in the example on the right, where potentially I know that the student is Asian, white, and non-resident alien. I would have done AN, pipe, W, pipe A. But we have gotten feedback from institutions that potentially you may not have the individual races, and therefore they are unknown. And so we've added this value to accommodate that. One of the things I do want to call out is we still do have trumping logic that remains. So if a student is included as non-resident alien, potentially, that's how they're going to be output. Hispanic, that's going to be how they're going to be output on the dashboard. And then we look at the values beyond that. So we do have a deduplicating mechanism there. The other thing is first generation, or first gen is the actual name, will now accept E as a value there. Again, some institutions were aware that potentially a parent or guardian had attended post-secondary education, but didn't know what credential or degree type that the parent had actually received. So what we've done is now added E again as a value to acknowledge that. Again, the logic is going to stay the same basically. E though is going to be put in with C, A, B, and E. And if any student is in any of those values or associated with any of those values, they would be considered not first generation on the dashboard, whereas those that would have N or P would be considered first generation on the dashboard. So again, those are the two updates that we've done on the cohort file with the corresponding pages in the current data submission guide, 19 and 20. We've also done a small update in the course file, which is for the course prefix. We've changed that variable type from alpha to alphanumeric. We did hear from some institutions that their course prefix was actually sometimes contained numbers, and when we had that as alpha, it would actually fail that because you couldn't include numbers in there. Again, we have changed that so that you can actually include numbers within the course prefix value. So again, some smaller but meaningful changes that we've definitely gotten feedback from our institutions, our data providers about, and we've tried to reflect that in the updates to the current one. I don't see any questions as of right now on just the update. I realize I think most people have come for this new information about what are these new optional variables / fields that we've added to the PDP data submission, and how do I actually get this done? I am going to say the next slide I'm going to put up is quite a bit of text, but what I've done is done this overview slide to understand all the things that you maybe need to do, and then I'm going to unpack each of them in turn on the following slides. So please do stay with me. Again, I will unpack them across the future slides. So I do want to acknowledge that all of these are completely optional fields. We have added 8 in the cohort file and 4 in the course file. But if you want to do any of them, so if you want to do any of these fields, you have to make all of the changes that I'm going to talk about. And again, I'm going to talk about that now and then show you a few examples by what I mean in regards to that. So the first thing that we're asking for our data submitters to do is to in some way indicate version 2 in the file name. So I have acknowledged this is optional. This is not a required. It won't fail your data submission by any means, but it really is actually a way for us to help you. So I'll unpack that in the next slide. You also need to indicate version 2 in the header record. I will talk about how to do that. And this is just for the respective files. So version 2 just needs to be added. If you're changing your cohort to a version 2 or your course to a version 2, you would do it in those respective files. If you're doing both, then both of them would require version 2. Again, we'll unpack that and give you some examples in just a few slides. The third thing you need to do is make sure to change the column header record and detail records to include the new fields, even if you're going to keep some of them blank. Again, they are completely optional, so you can potentially keep, let's say in the cohort file, 7 of them blank when you just want to upload 1, and I'll talk about how to actually do that. But you do need to make sure that the column header record and detail record structure changes to reflect that. Also, we do, of course, ask that you correctly use the values that have been added, and I will talk about all of those new values and fields that have been added across each of the files in turn. I will also talk about in one of the upcoming slides that all of these new optional variables can be actually updated. So if there's potentially you have already submitted data and you'd like to go back and amend or update that data to include this new optional data, you can actually do that. And the final note, right now, this is not going to actually change things you're going to see on the dashboard. And we are working on actually putting this information back into the AR file to give that back to you for use in conjunction with your other data. The reason as to why we have this, again, is to allow our data submitters to understand how to submit this data, do it, hopefully do it successfully, work with us, and get that there, and then we can work on providing that data back to you for use. So again, I will unpack each of these in turn and talk about each of what these terminology and the changes related to that are. So one of the first things that we do ask, and again, this is the optional but highly suggested thing that we do ask, which is in the part 3 of your file name, we do ask that in some way you include v2 in the name. For lack of a better phrase, sorry for the corniness, but it really is for us to help you with that. So if you're familiar right now with the file names, we basically have 4 parts to a file name. The first 2 are very important for you to have correct. So you have this I underscore. So again, this is this first part that we're talking to, a lowercase letter I followed by an underscore. This second part, which is segmented in green right here, is the FTP mailbox for your institution that you were provided during your PDP kickoff call by implementations. So of course, this is just an example one. You would have a different one than this. You would then have that followed by an underscore. Now in this third part, what you typically should be doing is in some way identifying the file that you're actually uploading. So for example, here, what we have is potentially an institution who is community. They are uploading their cohort file for fall 2020. If they are doing this as a V2, we would ask that you do an underscore and include V2. Again, there's no requirement for where it's actually placed within this, but really it's just a way for us to quickly help you and figure out, is this a version 2 file or not, is by you actually including this in here. This fourth part, all files either need to be a CSV or TXT. Again, so really not changed in a fundamental way from how you're currently doing this. Just again, in this third part, we would ask that in some way you actually include version 2 for us to be able to help you. Don't forget, avoid special characters, only use underscores in this file name. Please remember that. That has definitely not changed as well. So again, this is the first thing, which is the change to the file name. It is completely optional, but it is highly suggested that you do include this. After this, there really is nothing that is optional. I do apologize for that, but I want to make sure that that's very clear, that these are required things. Otherwise, potentially if you haven't done them, it would potentially fail the file. So I wanted to acknowledge that in the current files, there is a field 5. You have not been putting anything in there because it's a filler field. So in the current files, if you were submitting your cohort file, it would look very much like this. You'd have this DCA01, you'd have your service ID number, your org ID, branch code, and then field 5 would be blank. It would just have a comma on either side and be completely blank. If you are going to do a version 2 file, which is basically indicative of these, you're including these new optional data elements, in this field right here, you would put a 2.0. Please make sure that it is 2.0 that is included in this field right here. A 2 will not work. A 2 without a .o will not work. So really please do make sure you adhere to that it's this change in field 5 to 2.0. Again, this is a way for our data submission process to actually acknowledge or see that this is a file that should look like the 2.0 version and include that. Sorry, it is 2.0. I shouldn't say 2.0. My apologies. 2.0. So yeah, that is a numerical value. Just saw that in the chat. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. So again, the header record does require this. And if you're doing it in the cohort or course file, both of them would require that 2.0. 2.0. Okay. Change to the column header record and field. So I'm going to talk about this in each of the 2 files. I'm going to talk about it first in the cohort file version 2, and then I'm going to, on the next slide, talk about the course file. So right now, if you currently have your files, you could look at the end column header record, and it would end at cohort term end date would be the last record you actually have in that. You, for version 2, need to add all of these values to the column header record. So even again, if you're just intending to potentially provide just reading placement, you would need to put both reading placement, special program, NASPA first generation, so on and so forth. They all need to be added to your column header record, even if you're only going to do one of them. I would also like to very strongly call out this is a case sensitive field, so make sure that you are doing it in the case that is actually displayed here. So for example, reading placement, both the R and the P are uppercase. If either of those are lowercase, it could potentially fail the file because it's saying that it's not structured in the way that it would want them to. So not only do you need to change the column header record, but you also need to change the fields that are actually provided here. So as you can see here, there are the additions here. In this example, we do have data in all of those new fields. Just to show you that, again, I will show you an example of what it would look like if I'm just doing a couple of those fields. So in the column header record, again, you do need to put all of those headers in there, and they are case sensitive. You can then say, I'm only going to provide some of the data per my fields that I'm actually going to include. And again, I will walk you through an example in just a second. Now on the course file, if you're doing the course file version 2, again, the same idea. You do need to adjust all of your column header records to include these new additional fields: the credential engine identifier, the course instructor employment status, the course instructor rank, and foreign language completion. So it would look exactly like what I have here. Again, case sensitive. So again, if any of these potentially become lowercase for that first letter, it could potentially fail the file. So please do make sure that you're doing that, the case sensitive that adheres to what I'm showing you here. Then again, also in your fields, you would need to update this to have those fields. Even if you're going to leave them blank, you need to change the structure of the file to acknowledge that those fields have actually been added. And again, I will show you some examples of what does it look like if I'm going to do some that are blank and that some that are actually provided. So 3, again, change your column header record and fields for the respective files that you're doing. And then the fourth part is walking you a little bit through each of the new data elements just to explain them a little bit more to you so you understand what all of these are. So again, we've added 8 of them to the cohort file. So there are 4 slides for that. That's why it says 1 out of 4 at the top of this slide. I'm going to go through 4 slides and lay out all 8 new fields that you can actually upload and the values for that. Again, this is on pages 21 through 23 on the data submission guide currently. So the first one that we've added is the reading placement. So at time of first enrollment, was the student based on your institution standards, college ready, and reading? So this is what we call an enumerated field, meaning that you must use one of the 3 values that we have provided to you, either C, N, or UK. Any value other than that would be a failure because it's actually not contained within the list that we say are acceptable values. So again, reading placement is enumerated, meaning you have to use either C, N, or UK as that value. Again, it can be blank and it will not fail that. One thing that just to acknowledge in this parentheses right here is currently we're not tracking completion of this element. So this is really just saying when the student enrolled at your college for the first time, were they college ready or not? We're not tracking, do they then complete potentially a reading preparatory class or something like that?
Hey, Benjamin, we have a
Yep.
question on if they can leave that blank as well.
Yes, so all of these can be left blank, but again, if you actually put a value in there, it would have to be one of these 3 values. Good question. Again, it can be blank, but if there is a value there, it either needs to be C, N, or UK. No other values would be accepted.
Thank you.
Yeah. So variable 37 is special program. And so this is an indicator or a way to capture whether a student belongs to a specific or special program that you want to track and provide to us. So this is an alphanumeric field, so it can contain both numbers and alphabetic characters. One of the things I do want to acknowledge is it's up to 64 characters. So we do allow 64 characters worth of length, but none of those characters can be what we call special characters. So please do not include anything like slashes, asterisks, so on and so forth. It either needs to be a numeric value, a number, or an alphabetic value. If you have a special character in there, again, this would fail because it is not acceptable for this field. So we do give an example here. This would be acceptable because, again, it's just all alphabetic. There's no special characters in there. Again, please do make sure to avoid special characters in the special program field. Going on to the 2 out of 4, so this is the third and the fourth field that we've added to the cohort file. The first one is NASPA first generation. So as I acknowledged before, we've done a small change to the first gen field that I was talking about before. This is a different field that is related to how the organization of NASPA defines and thinks about first generation. So this is going to be separate from that first gen field that we already have within the files that you actually upload. So I do want to acknowledge that this field is not going to actually replace the first gen output that we already provide on the dashboard and AR values. It will be provided as a separate column, but it will not replace that. So again, this is an enumerated field. Enumerating always means that those values that we provide in this box over here are the only ones that you can provide. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 would all be fine. Anything other than that would potentially cause the file to fail. We've also added gender as an optional field in the cohort file. One thing just to acknowledge is this actually was not a data point that was actually submitted directly in your PDP files before. You are probably very familiar that we do have a gender filter on your dashboards, and we also provide it in the AR files. But that was actually being pulled from other data streams at NSC. What we're doing is slowly potentially pulling this directly through your PDP file, the gender of the student. And so it will eventually replace those values that we have on the dashboard and AR files, which is currently being worked on. We will still use, if you do provide the value of UK as gender, we will actually still use the imputing logic to try to determine, if we can, the gender of the student. So just to acknowledge, you can do male, female, P, prefer not to specify, or X, non-binary, intersex, or gender non-conforming, as well as UK. Again, this is an enumerated field, so that only those 5 values would be actually what is acceptable for this field. So moving on to the 3 out of 4 slides for our cohort file. The next one is incarcerated status. Again, at time of first enrollment at your institution, was or is the student actually incarcerated? So again, enumerated, so Y, P, N, and UK are the only values that can be actually accepted for this field. We also have added military status, the same idea that at time of first enrollment at your institution, did the student identify as active duty, reserves, National Guards, veteran, or unknown? One thing I do want to acknowledge with this second field is this is actually, if you potentially adhere to CEDS, Common Education Data Standards, yes, that you will actually potentially already have this field, but it combines, or you'll have this as maybe 2 separate fields. We've actually combined 2 of those fields, so you could potentially pull it in that way. Just something to acknowledge from how we actually set this up. For both of these, I do want to acknowledge that this is really about at time of first enrollment. This is not something we're capturing on a term by term basis. This is just really at time of first enrollment, what actually was their incarceration status or military status. So just something to acknowledge there as to why we have that language. And then the final 2 fields that we've added to the cohort file are employment status. Again, same idea that at time of first enrollment at your institution, what was the employment status, of the student. Again, this is enumerated, so only the values that we provide here, 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, would be acceptable. Any value other than that would potentially cause the file to fail. So do please make sure to use one of those values if you are doing this field. And finally, disability status. Again, at time of first enrollment, did the student identify with a disability? 3 values here, Y, N, and UK. Again, please do not use any other values but those 3 that we have provided for. Again, the same idea. This is a status capturing that we're doing at time of first enrollment at your institution. It's not a term by term kind of data field. Rita, I don't think I saw, I do realize I think I started going a little bit faster towards the end of some of those fields. I don't think I saw anything in question and answer, but maybe I am currently. Let's see.
We just had one question come in, and it is, why are disabilities lumped together?
We could certainly consider the idea of of separating them, but we used, I think for this field, I think it was something about, I don't think we use common education data standards, but it was more capturing it in just one field than multiple. I realize there is the idea that we could potentially separate these into different fields, and that's certainly something we can consider as a way to actually update this in the future. Again, this is the first time that we've had disability status that we're capturing. It's certainly something we could consider is actually having different values for that.
Will version 1 still be accepted?
So version 1 is still going to be accepted. We are supporting version 1 and version 2. And really for version 1, there are no changes that you're actually going to be doing to the file structure or anything like that. So version 1 is still accepted. And I will talk about that a little bit when I'm giving some of the examples. You'll see what you have to change for one and what you don't have to change for the other. You'll see that, and hopefully that will actually kind of clarify that a little bit more. I think I saw another question in there, but it may have disappeared, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think they're asking if all of these fields can be left blank versus entering unknown.
Oops. Um, so you could certainly do that, but ultimately, if you are just deciding that you're going to leave them all blank, you may not want to shift right now to version 2. You could certainly shift to version 2 because that might be something you'll actually want to do. But if you're going to leave them all blank, it's really up to you.
Two more questions. One on the disability status. So it's asking, are there any legal considerations when supplying disability status data for individual students?
That was in part why we actually did collapse across those different values to actually create a little bit more about that. But again, at NSC, we always are very secure with your data, considerate with your data. So we did consider that. And in part, again, that is why we did do the collapsing of Y, N, and UK for that. Certainly, if there's some feedback or concerns about that, please do let us know. This is an optional field, so if it's not something that your institution feels comfortable sharing, it is completely optional and up to you.
Right. And then the last question is related to the header record. So if they choose to not do these V2 optional fields, is the header, the V2 and the header record, which I believe it was 2.0, not V2, optional as well?
So again, if you're not going to use any of the version 2 fields, you don't have to make any changes to your files currently. So you would leave it completely the same. The filler field that we've changed to actually have V2 included in it is again a reflection of, hey, I'm now submitting the version 2 of this file. And that's how we actually can know that right from the submission process. If you're not going to do that, you don't need to change anything. Some students have values, but some don't. Can you leave null versus putting unknown? You can, yeah, you can definitely put null if you would prefer. As you may have noticed, some of our values have unknown is crossed with something else. So you could certainly say, I want to actually leave this blank because I think that's a better representation of my data than saying unknown. That's perfectly fine. Okay. So I'm going to keep going, and again, we'll get to some of the specific examples, which hopefully will clarify some of those questions if I didn't. The other thing we need to talk about is the course file additions. Again, there are 4 that are added here, so there's 2 slides to talk about that. The first is the credential engine identifier. So if you're not familiar with credential engine identifier, there are links that are contained within the data submission guide for you to become more familiar with that. But it is very much a standardized way of understanding courses that may lead to some kind of certain credential. It is 39 characters because they are going to be in that length. This is an example of one of them. So it would be something along this length, and it does contain hyphens. So we do, in this field, allow that special character of hyphens within it. No other special characters would be allowed, and it is alphanumeric. So only alphabetic and numeric characters can be contained within here, as well as hyphens. And again, it is restricted to 39 characters as well, because that is the length of those identifiers. The other one, and I apologize, there's going to be two that actually kind of relate to each other, but I had to split them across slides. The first one is the course instructor employment status. So for the course that you're telling us about, what was the part-time or full-time status for the instructor? I do realize at some institutions that you may have courses that are taught by co-instructors or something along those lines. We really need the institution to actually submit for just one instructor for that course. We can't accept information about two separate instructors. So that is one call out. I do want to make sure that if you're indicating the course instructor employment status for the course, please just make sure you pick the one instructor. And then related to that, again, this is split between two slides. I apologize, is the course instructor rank. Again, for that course, what was the rank given to the instructor by the institution? Again, same situation. You must pick the one instructor that you've already picked for part-time, full-time to actually give us the information about the academic rank of the course instructor. And then finally is foreign language completion. So potentially at your institution, you may have some kind of foreign language requirement for graduation, or just a foreign language completion requirement, generally speaking. And what we're asking is, for that term that you're actually telling us about, did the student satisfy a foreign language requirement that your institution has? So again, this is actually more of a term-based piece of information, not course. So for that term that you're providing information about, you would say during that term, did they actually evaluate and satisfy your foreign language completion, or potentially evaluate but not satisfy that? So the final thing I did want to acknowledge before I get into some of the examples I wanted to go through with you, just to hopefully answer some of your questions, is that you can actually update all of these fields using the update process. So again, if you have data for cohorts or courses that you've potentially already given to us at PDP, and you'd like to actually amend this data with this information, all of it can actually be done through the update process. I do want to acknowledge that the data that you're trying to update might drive which file you're going to do. So if you're potentially trying to update information about the cohort for that student, you would go through the cohort update. If it's course, which would be those three of the four that I talked about, which is the credential engine identifier, course instructor employment status, and course instructor rank, you would go through the course update. But if you're trying to provide or update the foreign language completion, it would go through the course term update files. So just something to acknowledge about figuring out where that data actually sits within this update process is important. And again, I will go through an example of what do I do if I'm trying to update my data previously submitted. I was trying to unpack the basics, and hopefully some of these special cases will help you understand for your institution what you're potentially intending to do and what you need to do to actually do this successfully. So I'm going to again put up some slides that are potentially a lot of information. And again, I'm going to do the same approach where I throw up the scenario or situation, and then I unpack it through the slides following that. So I will unpack these cases. So let's say, and again, this is one case, one example that I've come up with. Let's say I, at my institution, want to submit just one of the new optional fields in the cohort file and two in the course file. What do I have to do? Okay, so let's go through this checklist and kind of go through them in order. And again, I will unpack each of them. So because you're wanting to do these optional fields in both files, you need to make sure that you actually add that version 2 indicator to your header record. And I'll talk about how that actually is. I do realize I will talk about how you actually do that. I realize it should actually have the 2.0. Apologize for that. Change both of your column header records for both files to include all of the new columns, including for records you intend to leave blank. change the number of commas in the detail records to match the number of column header records. So 8 commas added in the cohort, 4 in course. Add the relevant data for the one field that you're saying you want to do for the cohort file and 2 fields in the course file and leave the rest blank. Again, blank because not required, so you can leave them actually blank. And again, optional but highly suggested is change the file name for both to include v2. So let me unpack each of those in turn and give you the specifics of that information just to make sure you understand. So what I've done here is kind of talk through what I would actually do for the cohort file changes. So again, in this case, I'm trying to do just one of these fields for the cohort file. So what do I potentially do? So in my header record, again, in that filler field, I'm going to put the 2.0 to indicate that this is this version 2 file that I'm actually providing to you. So that's the first thing I definitely have to do in my cohort file. The other thing that I have to do, regardless of the fact that I'm only doing one of those fields in the actual detail records, is I have to add all of them to my column header record. So here, again, in this example, I'm highlighting or showing you that all of these things are being added actually to my column header record. So I've added reading placement, special program, NASPA, first generation, gender, incarcerated status, military status, employment status, and disability status. Again, being very careful with case, making sure that these are matching the case that we ask for. Now, though, what I've decided again at my institution is all I want to actually do is provide the special program for this. So now what I've done is I've left reading placement blank, right? So I have this comma, blank, comma, but now I've put in this special program indicator. And then that's all I want to do, but I now have the rest of these fields blank, and the corresponding commas that actually sit there. So again, I'm actually changing the structure here, but I'm only including that one field I wanted to include, which is special program in my cohort file. So I've done the 2.0, added all of the things to the column header record, but only input the one piece of information I wanted to and left the rest blank. Now, I realize you're probably not going to do this for just one student. I realize I can't do an example for multiple students because I've run out of slide space, but this is what I would have to do for the cohort file in this scenario that I've provided to you. Now, in the course file, I'm only going to do 2 of these pieces of information. But again, what I'd have to do again in the course file for field 5 is do the 2.0. And then I'd have to put in all 4 changes into my column header record. Credential engine identifier, course instructor employment status, course instructor rank, and foreign language completion. So all 4 of those are being added. But in this file, I just want to provide the course instructor employment status and the course instructor rank. So again, I've left the credential engine identifier blank. I've added the commas, but I've left it blank. I've added PT for part-time, and I've added 1 for the rank of the instructor. And I've then left the foreign language completion blank after that. So again, I've only done those 2 that I wanted to do, but I've done all the other changes I need to do to be allowed to do that. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense as that first example. I'm again going to go through some other ones, some other combinations that again, hopefully will kind of help you understand what needs to occur. So now in this new one, this new special case, what I've decided actually is I want to just submit 3 of the new optional fields in just the cohort file and none in the course file. What do I have to do? So in this case, what I am doing as the data submitter is realizing that I only want to change my cohort file to this new version 2 style. So this is that idea that only in my cohort file would I change this filler field to now include the 2.0. I would not do this in my course. This would remain blank because I am not changing that in my course file. I'm not intending to do this version 2 in my course file. So I'm going to actually keep it the way I was already doing it. So in this, again, you're going to change your column header records for only the cohort file to include all of those new columns and change the number of columns for for only the cohort file. And then add the relevant data for the 3 fields in the cohort file, leaving the rest blank. And again, optionally, I can change the file name for only the cohort file to include version 2. Again, because I'm not actually going to upload any of this information in the course file, I can remain as it was already and not do any changes. So this is an example of what my cohort file would now look like in this scenario, again, where I'm doing 3 in the cohort file and 0 in the course file. I'm not doing anything there, so I don't want to update it potentially. So here again, I would add the 2.0 to the filler field. I would add all of these column headers that are required for the cohort file version 2. And then I would add just the 3 that I'm currently doing. So I'm doing special program, NASPA first generation, and gender. So as you can see, I've left reading placement blank. I've added those 3, and I've left the following ones also blank in my detail records. I do want to acknowledge you could potentially switch over both, but you are not required to do that. And then the final, and I do apologize, running a little bit low on time. I wanted to make sure we had some time for questions. The final thing that I wanted to provide, and I think this is the best way to unpack this, is what if I want to update information that I, again, have already provided to you potentially. So let's say at my institution, I want to update or add to my old course data only. What do I have to do? I just want to do the course instructor employment status and the course instructor rank. What do I have to do? Again, in this case, because I'm looking at something that is maybe course or term based, I really want to make sure which update file I want to use. Is it the course update file or the course term update file I want to use? So you can refer to page 57 in the data submission guide for this. In this case, I would want to do the course update in this because it's the course instructor employment status and course instructor rank. Both of those fall under the course update file. The other thing, and again, I will unpack this, is I want to make sure the data is fully merged into the NSC data warehouse. I want to make sure to add that 2.0 to the course update file. I want to make sure to change my column header records to include all of the new columns, even again, if I'm only going to do some of them, and I'm only doing 2 out of 3. And then also, again, change the detail records to match the number of column header records. I'm going to add 3 commas. Then I would add the relevant data for those and leave the rest blank. Again, that third one I'm not doing, so it can be blank. Again, finally, I can optionally add the V2 into the file name so that I can kind of indicate both to us and to ourselves that this is a V2 file on that data submission. So one of the first steps that I really do want to call out in regards to whenever you're submitting an update file, where you're trying to update data you already have submitted to NSC, is you want to make sure that that data has actually successfully been submitted to NSC and actually made it into our data warehouse. So this is just a simple check that I would definitely suggest to make sure that your updating of previously submitted data actually is successful, is to make sure that we actually have that data properly into the data warehouse and that it's completely merged into the data warehouse. So what you want to do, and hopefully most of you are familiar with the screen that I've taken a screenshot and showing you in the behind all this information, is this is the data submission, that secure portal that you can log into. You want to log into that and to look at what data you've actually provided and make sure that the file that you're thinking about updating that contains that data is actually in the status of data quality passed. So again, what I would say for you to do is go in here and say, okay, I'm going to look for, let's say it's this file right here. I know that potentially because I've expanded this, I've opened this up and I've looked at this course file and I said, okay, this is the course file for the term. It's definitely this one. Well, now what I want to do is make sure that that file has actually passed into what the status that we call data quality passed. What that means is that it has actually merged into our data warehouse and therefore can actually be updated. Files that are not in our data warehouse, you can't update because they're not there for updating purposes. So really do make sure that you do this first step. Otherwise, the updating process is not going to work successfully. Again, I've made sure that that file that I'm trying to update with that data is actually merged into the data warehouse. What I'm now going to do is say, okay, I want to use the course update file. I'm now going to make the relevant changes to the one I previously been using by adding the information that I need to add to the structure as well as the information contained within that. So first in the header record, again, I need to add 2.0. In the column header records, I need to add all 4 of those. So credential engine identifier, course instructor, so on and so forth. But now again, in this situation, I've decided I just want to update 2 of these. Again, in this situation, I would leave this first one blank. I'd have the PT one and then leave the 4th one blank. Um, so uh, I think that's really important. And the other thing I just do want to make sure to call out is in your detail records, you may want to include just what is required for the purposes of updating and only what you're updating. So in the example, in the example I have here, I have all of the fields that I potentially could put in there. So everything has data in those fields. In the update process, you don't necessarily have to include all of the values within each of those fields. What you can actually do is look through the data submission guide and say, is this field actually required for update? Then yes, you have to make sure that that information is provided. If it is not required for the purposes of actually updating, you can actually leave it blank and successfully update. So I would suggest this highly because what might happen is if you put in data that you're not trying to update, you may put that in incorrectly or something like that. So it's better to actually keep this file smaller and really just what is required and what you're trying to update is contained within it. So I have required for update equals yes. Okay, I need to make sure that that's there. And I also need to make sure that that matches the original data. So for example, if I'm saying I want to update fall 2019 for Bob, right? So Bob is in this information and they're in the cohort of fall 2019. I want to make sure that in my update file, I'm saying for Bob in fall 2019, I'm trying to update their information. So I need to make sure that the cohort term, cohort, all those things that are required for update are there correctly because those are what we're going to use to match and find that student for updating purposes. And again, then on this other column, if it can be updated, but you don't necessarily want to update it, you don't need to actually include that information. So if there's another field that can actually be updated, but it's not something you're intending to update with this file that you're submitting, just leave that blank. So you could potentially actually leave that blank to avoid accidentally updating a field that you're not actually trying to. So have your required fields for sure, and they definitely match what you already have about that student, telling us about that student, and then those can be updated. Just the one you're trying to update is the one that you're potentially going to include. So I do realize I addressed some questions and some chat as I was actually going through this, but I did want to actually take the last 10 minutes of this to make sure that I had some time in case there was any clarifications, questions, comments that I can address. I can certainly go back to a slide. So if there was a slide in which potentially I said something that was confusing, please do let me know. So if you want to put that in chat or Q&A, I can go back to that and clarify or expand on something if need be. So we are going to continue to support version 1 for definitely, I think the intent is about 6 months from now, and we are going to actually slowly ask people to switch over to version 2 with a lot of support. So we will, again, continue to accept version 1 and kind of slowly move over to version 2. With your update file, if you're just intending to update for just one student, you could just potentially have a file that's just updating for one student. It doesn't have to include all of those students. You could just say, again, for Bob in fall 2019, I apologize for my use again of the same example. For Bob in fall 2019, I just need to provide you an update on something just relevant to them. You can certainly do that. You don't have to update all of the information for all of those students potentially, or make the file exactly the same. Hopefully that answers that question. And then, so the other question it looks like is the key performance indicators, the dashboards. So again, as of right now, really no plans to actually update them holistically. Gender is the one thing that we are considering as, let me go back just so I can show you real quick. There we go. Gender is one thing that we would actually update the filters to include male, M, F, P, and X, and UK. Eventually, that is work in progress, but that is really the only work that is currently ongoing. And it isn't required. You don't, right? You don't have to switch over to version 2 um, immediately or anything like that. Hopefully that helps with that question. Think, Rita, I think we're okay. I hope that everyone has been able to type out your questions and have them answered. And like I said, I certainly appreciate you coming at the end of May. I realize this semester may have just ended and you're just recovering from that. I certainly appreciate your attendance today and listening to what we're doing in PDP. Again, if you have any questions or anything that was not addressed today, please shoot us an email at the PDP service email, just like normal. And also, don't forget that we do have this knowledge base at studentclearinghouse.org/PDP help. The data submission guide has been completely updated to reflect this change that we've done. So please do let us know if you have any questions or any concerns. And like I said, we will be sending out the slides I presented here today for your use and kind of knowledge shortly after this presentation. So I definitely appreciate you taking some time, and hopefully everyone has a long weekend and appreciates that. Thanks, everyone.